Title: The Archivist's Paradox. Author Peter Lamb. Chapter 1. A Glitch in the Feed. Julian Greaves always reviewed memory feeds with the same precision he used to build them, slow, careful, skeptical of anything too clean. The footage arrived in a black box, no sender, no timestamp, just a handwritten note inside. This was never supposed to be seen. He stared at the note for a moment longer than he meant to, then slid the microvault into the reader embedded in his wrist. A soft pulse flickered under his skin. The feed began to unspool. It was someone else's perspective. Female, early 30s. Her eyes darted across a dimly lit conference room. 3 men stood at the far end, their faces blurred. Not by compression artifacts, not a technical glitch. Blurred on purpose. The woman's voice came through in a whisper, barely audible through the background hum. They've been altering core vaults, not just suspects, not just high-risk profiles. Everyone. Even you. Then, static. The feed cut out. Julian blinked as his own implant rebooted, a sharp flicker at the edge of his vision. That almost never happened. He sat back in the archive chamber's recliner, surrounded by kilometers of silent data towers humming behind the walls. White lights reflected off the chrome surfaces of the memory vault's interior. The hum was comforting, predictable. He should have flagged the footage, forwarded it to oversight, but instead, he copied it. Outside, London eased into twilight. A blanket of orange haze dipped over the Thames, casting glass towers into a slow dissolve. Shadows of memories, as always, playing tricks on architecture. Julian pressed his fingers to his temple, drawing a breath. The woman's voice had seemed familiar, too familiar. He searched his personal archive for any record of her. No match. But when he closed his eyes, her face returned, not pixelated or remote, but close. As if he'd once watched her laugh. As if she had meant something. "How would she know my vault's been altered?" he whispered. The question hovered in the air like smoke. There was no logical reason for her to know anything about him. She was a stranger. A ghost. Except she wasn't. Somewhere, buried beyond access protocols and version histories, Julian Greaves knew the truth. He had just forgotten how to remember it. Chapter 2. The revisionist trail. Julian had protocols for anomalies. 10 of them. Meticulously written, endlessly refined. But none accounted for this. An unauthorized memory feed. A dead woman speaking in whispers. And a face he couldn't possibly recognize, yet did. He waited until the archive chamber's surveillance cycle reset, then slipped through the side corridor into his private console bay. Once inside, he sealed the magnetic door and disabled the audit beacons. Just 10 minutes. Enough time to ask the forbidden question. Who was she? He ran a biometric trace on the woman in the footage. The results took only seconds. Iris Delaney, journalist, deceased, July 7, 2042. 3 years ago. The same day Parliament passed the Memorica Regulation Act, the law that made memory archiving mandatory. Julian stared at her photo, archived from a press badge. Soft eyes, dark hair, skeptical smile. She looked like someone who didn't trust systems or people. The official report said she died in a road accident on the M25. No suspicious circumstances, no follow-up investigation, no memory vault request filed by family or employer. But someone had preserved her feed, deliberately, encrypted it, and made sure it found its way to him. "Why?" he murmured. He opened her last public article, buried in an old digital archive, a piece on the ethics of memory surveillance. Forgettable until he reached the final paragraph. The greatest threat isn't forgetting, it's the illusion that we remember freely. The words struck something raw, not recognition, something deeper, like déjà vu with teeth. Julian whispered the line aloud, and that's when it happened. A new memory surfaced, not from his archive, not from any implant, from inside him. A memory of standing beside Iris Delaney on a train platform. Dull rain, neon timetables. She looked directly at him and said those exact words. But that memory wasn't logged, not even ghosted. He checked the feed from July 7, 2042, his own vault. The timestamp for that hour existed, but the audio was gone. The footage showed him, yes, standing on the platform, alone. Except he wasn't alone. In the raw image frames, he could see her shadow, just out of frame. Her coat, her silhouette. Someone had clipped her out. The archive had been altered. Precisely. Surgically. They deleted her, he breathed. From me. His hand trembled as he disconnected from the console. The room felt smaller now, the walls closer, the lights too bright. Someone had gone through an extraordinary effort to remove Iris Delaney from history, yet had left breadcrumbs for him to follow, and he had just picked up the first one. Chapter 3. A Fragmented Truth. Julian sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, the words Iris Delaney blinking in a rhythm that almost seemed deliberate. He'd run the trace on her vault, no matches to the official records. But the question lingered. How had a memory so intimately tied to him vanished from his own vault? He toggled through her file again, the biometric signature now seared into his mind. No recent activity, no new connections in the vault system. Nothing. Just an old article, a dead woman, and the whispers of a fractured reality. His fingers hovered over the keys, but he hesitated. Deep down, he knew the answer would lead him to something dangerous, perhaps something irrevocable. But curiosity, sharp and insistent, pushed him forward. He pulled up her case file, then accessed the archive's hidden layer, a place reserved only for discrepancies. Julian had been part of the team that designed the vault systems. He knew all the backdoors, the fail-safes, but what he found now made his skin crawl. A segment of memory his own was corrupted, completely missing. July 7th, 2042. He clicked on the file, initiating a deep recovery scan. What appeared next made him freeze. A video. Of him. But it wasn't from the archived day. It was recent. His own face, visible only through the reflection in a glass pane. He recognized the background, the archive vault's data rack. He was standing in the exact spot where he had started his search. But the timestamp on the video was from a week ago. A split second of clarity, and then another face flickering in the reflection. Iris Delaney. Her expression was strained, eyes wide. She mouthed something, but the sound didn't sync. I knew her. His memory surged with overwhelming disorientation. He had never met Iris Delaney, not in the recorded vault. Yet here she was, moving through a moment that felt more real than anything he had experienced in years. What was the purpose of this? Why was it hidden so carefully? His hand hovered above the delete key. No, he couldn't delete it. This was his only clue. But if someone was behind this, Julian knew he was already a step behind. The deeper truth was too clear. Someone had crafted a story where Julian was merely a character in someone else's game. And it wasn't just about Iris, it was about him. If he was to survive this puzzle, he had to play along. He had to discover how far this web stretched, and who had spun it. The screen flickered again, just for a moment. Something glitched. The voice, his own voice from the footage, had returned. Faint, distorted. Find her. You will, but at a cost. He blinked, rubbing his temples, but the words replayed in his mind with perfect clarity. This wasn't a memory glitch. This was a message. It was time to go to her grave. Chapter 4. The grave that wasn't there. The cemetery was older than Julian expected. No drones overhead, no security domes, just wind, moss, and stone. It sat on the southern edge of the city, far from Archive Corp's surveillance clusters, a place built for memory, the old-fashioned way, engraved in granite, not gigabytes. He found her name easily enough, Iris Delaney, Plot 49, North Side. According to the public register, she'd been buried under a state-funded cremation plaque. But when he reached the plot, there was no plaque, no marker, just a patch of earth, barely disturbed. Julian knelt down, pressing a hand to the cold ground. Something didn't fit. Cremations always had trace particles, resin tags, data tags embedded in the stone. He scanned the soil. Nothing. She wasn't here. Or if she had been, they'd removed her completely. He stood slowly, scanning the rows. An old groundskeeper shuffled nearby, dragging a hose along the gravel. "Excuse me, I'm looking for someone buried here. Iris Delaney. Plot 49? The man stopped, gave him a long, wary glance, then spat in the dirt. "Delaney? Ain't no Delaney buried here. That's a state ghost plot." Julian stepped forward cautiously. "Ghost plot?" "Yeah, ones they pretend are used. Paperwork says one thing, ground says another. They've been doing it for years. Memory dumpers. Archive cleanups. I don't ask questions. I just water the grass." Julian's blood turned cold. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a digital ID tag. It bore no name, just Archive Corp clearance. "Do you remember if anyone ever came looking for her? Before me?" "Two men in coats. Didn't say a word. Dug quiet. Left before dawn. That was 3 nights ago. Right before the fog came. 3 nights ago. Just before he'd received the black box." He thanked the man and walked back to the lot's edge. The wind had picked up, rustling dried leaves through the silence. If she wasn't buried, then where was she? His implant buzzed suddenly. An alert. Unauthorized attempt to access his vault logs. Incoming ping. Unknown source. He disabled the neural sync. Static flooded his peripheral vision for half a second. Then, silence. They were watching him. He reached his car and slid behind the wheel. As he drove, his mind returned to the feed. The voice. The reflection. The impossible memory. If Iris Delaney was alive, she was off-grid. If she was dead, someone had erased more than just her records. They'd erased his memories of her too. But they hadn't erased everything, and now he was remembering more than they had planned for. Chapter 5. The Forbidden Protocol. Julian knew he was being followed. Not with footsteps or car chases, that would be crude. He felt it in the sync lag of his implant, in the half-second delay between thought and command, in the flicker of lights in Archive Corp's lower corridors. Someone had placed a hand on the system's pulse. Not to crash it, just to listen. He needed answers fast. Answers buried where only someone with level 7 clearance could go. There were only 3 people alive with that kind of access. 2 of them were public, board members. The third was a name no one spoke aloud. Dr. Mercer Vale, architect of the earliest vault designs. A recluse. A ghost in the machine. Julian hadn't seen Vale in 7 years, but he remembered the back door, a forgotten sub-terminal buried deep in the original archive vault, beneath the floor panels, behind a manual wall plate. Before cloud sync, before retinal keys, it was a relic, analog, undetectable. At 2:14 a.m., he slipped into the Archive Corp maintenance level using a stolen janitorial pass. No one questioned cleaners. They moved like shadows and were ignored just as easily. He moved past the cooling vents and down a maintenance ladder into the old sector. The concrete walls were damp, the lights soft yellow and buzzing faintly. He found the panel. Removed the screws with a magnetized wrist tool. Inside, the old console blinked once. Green. Still alive. He plugged in a tether line from his wrist implant and bypassed the security layer using Mercer's original cipher, Nostos. Return to self. The terminal responded. One directory appeared on screen. Project Shard. He hesitated. The name meant nothing, yet it filled him with dread. He opened the file. Streams of text and visual logs loaded, classified memories, not just his. Hundreds, thousands, sorted by subject and behavioral flags. These were people whose memories had been edited, some trimmed, others entirely replaced. He opened his own profile. There it was, July 7th, 2042. 2 memory events flagged for extraction, one tagged with a label he hadn't seen before. Shard Prime. The data was encrypted but partially intact. It wasn't just about Iris Delaney. The system had flagged their encounter because of what she told him. She hadn't been warning him about memory theft. She had been warning him that he was part of it. His role hadn't been passive. He hadn't just reviewed vault integrity. He had authorized extractions, signed redactions. His implant had been firewalled by himself. He had buried his own complicity. And now the system was failing, because he was starting to remember what he had once begged to forget. Chapter 6. Recursive Shadows. Julian didn't leave the subterminal right away. He just sat there, blinking at the old phosphor screen, watching his name scroll past over and over. Greaves, Julian. Greaves, Julian. Shard Prime, loop flagged. He accessed the loop marker. Inside was a set of entries, all time-stamped at irregular intervals over 7 years. 7 identical entries, 7 different redactions, each one ending with the same line. Subject requested memory suppression, confirmed and executed. The subject was him. He had asked to forget. Not once, but 7 times, and with each cycle his memories of Iris Delaney had returned, fragmented, mutated, always enough to provoke doubt, but never enough to act. Until now. The interface beeped. A prompt appeared. Memory breach pattern detected. Recommend suppression protocol reinitiation. Accept YN? They wanted him to erase it again. His finger hovered over the keys. What if they were right? What if the memories had been suppressed for a reason? What if remembering didn't liberate him, but destroyed him? He closed his eyes, breathing slow, and the train platform returned. Iris Delaney, her breath forming fog in the cold air, her hand brushing his, her voice saying, "You only forget what they're afraid you'll remember." He opened his eyes, pressed N. No more forgetting. Instantly, a new stream of data unfurled, previously locked. Surveillance logs, private comms, internal memos from Archive Corp's Blackroom division. It wasn't just memory manipulation. It was narrative control. Human history, rewritten one vault at a time. They weren't just cleaning the past. They were curating reality. And somewhere in the center of it all was Iris, a rogue journalist turned whistleblower, a woman who'd reached into the machine and tried to pull him out. Julian backed out of the terminal, closed the panel, and climbed back into the cold, fluorescent world above. This time, he would find her, or find the truth she died to deliver. And if the system came for him again, he would remember everything. Chapter 7. The Vault. Beneath the vault. Julian didn't return home. He couldn't. Not now. Every corner of his apartment was wired into the VaultNet grid. Every reflection a lens. Every silence a potential listening post. Instead, he checked into a blackout motel off the old ring road. No sync ports, no smart keys, just analog locks and curtains thick enough to drown daylight. A place built for forgetting. But Julian had no intention of forgetting anything ever again. He laid out the stolen data chip on the desk next to a worn photo he found buried in the decrypted shard archive. It was blurry, cropped but unmistakable. Iris and him, together. Not as strangers, not as source and investigator. They were something else. Lovers, friends, co-conspirators. The photo was marked Vault 0. A file path led to a physical location, coordinates buried beneath Archive Corp's founding blueprints. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a real place. Vault 0, the first memory bank, the original node before neural streaming became default. Before suppression protocols, before shard, before Julian betrayed himself. He had to get inside. The next morning, he walked into Archive Corp headquarters dressed in a courier's vest, face obscured by a regulation mask, carrying a sealed package with a forged priority tag. Security glanced, scanned, waved him through, 4 floors down, access tunnel B7. Back route to the data sink, unlisted in the new plans. Julian found the panel and pressed the override key embedded in his palm, the last thing he'd ever kept hidden, even from himself. The wall hissed open. A stairwell, narrow and cold, spiraled down into a black concrete throat. No lights, just breath, his own. Each step downward felt like peeling away layers of self. By the 10th level, he wasn't Julian Greaves, the Archivist. He was something older, something buried. At the bottom, a door, steel, no handle, just a retinal scanner long decommissioned. He leaned in, a click, recognition. The door opened. Vault 0 wasn't digital. It was a vault in the literal sense, rows of physical servers, analog drives, paper records, and in the center, a chair, worn leather, familiar. He had sat here before. The walls were lined with mirrors, angled to reflect but never reveal the center of the room. A terminal blinked to life, text only. Welcome back, Julian. Loop 7 complete, awaiting final input. This wasn't just a memory archive. This was a loop chamber. He had come here, again and again, and chosen to forget. But this time, the system had made a mistake. It had let him remember too much. And now he had a choice. Break the loop, or become its architect all over again. Chapter 8. The Question That Undoes You. Narrator, calm but emotionally tight, shifting between resolve, uncertainty, and haunting realization. The terminal blinked, waiting, the cursor pulsed like a heartbeat. Loop 7 complete, awaiting final input. Underneath, do you wish to remember YN? Julian sat in the chair, the leather worn into the shape of his own history. His fingers trembled above the keys, not from fear, from something heavier. Recognition. He had answered this before, 6 times before, and each time he had chosen no. The loop didn't reset because he was forced to forget. It reset because he asked to. Voluntary amnesia. Each time more elaborate, more precise, more deeply embedded. To protect what? The screen shifted, new text appeared. Accessing Shard Prime Core, memory lock override. Subject Julian Greaves, classified payload, Project Obelisk. Obelisk? A loading bar filled slowly. Then images, real ones, began to flash across the screen. Footage. Not simulations, not dreams. Julian Iris, together. In an old safe house, they weren't investigating Shard, they were building it. He hadn't discovered the loop. He had designed it. In a hidden moment of clarity, Iris had filmed a confession. If you're watching this, it means the system cracked. You were never meant to go this far. But if you did, it means you're ready. Or broken. She leaned in close to the lens. We had to build Shard. There was no choice. The truth was killing people. Whole populations collapsing under the weight of too much memory. We didn't steal the past. We protected it. Julian stared at her face, captured in old codec, lips trembling. You asked me to help you forget, Julian. You begged me. But I kept the seed alive. One version, one final truth. This recording. The screen went black, then flashed a final prompt. Execute final recall. All suppressed memories will return. Loop structure will collapse. Risk undefined. Julian closed his eyes. What if he had done the right thing back then? What if forgetting had saved lives? What if remembering now condemned them? His finger hovered over the key. He could feel the weight of 7 versions of himself, all standing behind him in silence. He pressed Y. The screen didn't respond. The room didn't change. But inside his head, everything shattered. Every suppressed moment came back. Every erased betrayal. Every time Iris cried. Every time she begged him not to continue. Every time he did anyway. And the worst part? She hadn't just helped him forget. She had stayed behind in the system. As the price. Chapter 9. Ghost in the core. The world around Julian didn't blur, it fractured. He wasn't in Vault Zero anymore. Or he was, but the room had changed. Not physically, internally. The light was different, the air too still. He remembered everything. The early years, the neural threading experiments, the first vaults, messy and vulnerable to trauma bleed. The Archive Corp board begging them to invent Shard to cleanse not just memory but perception. It wasn't meant to control people. Not at first. It was meant to protect them. People were collapsing under the weight of trauma, paranoia, psychosis, mass memory disorder. Shard was designed to prune, to streamline history, to reduce suffering, but it didn't stop there. It became a weapon. Governments demanded edits. Corporations rewrote scandals. Courts admitted vault footage as gospel, ignoring the silence shaping every narrative. Julian had resisted. At first, then he folded. Again and again. Iris had been the last to believe in him, and he repaid her by forcing her into the loop. She hadn't just left behind a video, she had uploaded herself, not a full consciousness, not AI, but a memory structure. Echoes of thought, personality shadows, a digital ghost. Julian reopened the Shard core. It recognized him now. No locks, no resistance, just a terminal prompt. Initialize Iris construct YN. He didn't hesitate, the screen blinged a voice. Hello again, Julian. He stared, heart pounding. There was no face, just a voice. But it was her, not a copy, not a simulation, a neural pattern, fragile, partial, incomplete, but real. You stayed. Part of me did. The part you needed, the part that wouldn't let you forget what we were. I killed you. No, you buried me. There's a difference. I can fix this. I can end Shard, bring everything back. Full disclosure, global restore. You can try, but the world wants the lie now. Truth hurts too much. They'll fight to stay asleep. Julian stared at the blank screen, her voice in his ears like warm breath. I don't care. He backed up the Iris construct, compressed it, carried it with him on a cold silver drive. Then he walked away from Vault Zero for the last time. No longer an archivist, but a thief of truth, a saboteur, and perhaps, finally, a man worth remembering. Chapter 10. The World That Doesn't Want to Wake Up. Julian walked the city in silence. No implant active, no vault connection, just a signal blocking field woven into his jacket and a data shard colder than bone pressed against his chest. London looked the same. Crowded cafes, people laughing into nothing, eyes half-focused as vault feeds streamed across their thoughts. Memory wasn't personal anymore. It was licensed, and no one seemed to care. He ducked into a forgotten maintenance access point beneath a shopping plaza, now converted into a darknet drop site. Inside, a cracked terminal. A copper uplink, a choice. Julian uploaded the first bundle, raw vault footage from politicians, judges, corporate leaders, all of them redacted by Shard, buried truths, murder, bribery, gaslight campaigns. It took 38 seconds to go viral. The footage detonated online, not in legacy news, not even in social forums. It bloomed in encrypted rooms, pirate mirrors, torrent threads, a wildfire. And then, the blowback. Archive Corp released a public statement within hours. A rogue former employee has fabricated footage using synthetic memory overlays. We urge citizens to trust only verified VaultNet records. Unauthorized sources may cause psychological instability. They called him dangerous, not for what he revealed, but for threatening the illusion. Within 12 hours, his safe house was raided. Unmanned drones swept the perimeter. Facial recognition pinged from a passing security mirror. He escaped through an old tube tunnel just before lockdown. Iris's voice chimed softly through the microchannel in his ear. You knew they'd react this way. They were supposed to see, to wake up. They saw. But they're afraid. Fear is more comforting than truth. Julian climbed up through a utility shaft into a forgotten post office above Waterloo. Inside, dust and dead cables, no signal. Safe, temporarily. He leaned against the wall, letting the last few minutes of chaos drain from his chest. They don't want it. The truth. They're clinging to the dream. That's not your choice anymore, you showed them. That's enough. But it didn't feel like enough. A news ticker flickered on an old rooftop billboard across the street. Unverified memory surge prompts global vault lockdown. Archive Corp responds with safety pledge. They weren't losing control. They were reinforcing it. Julian closed his eyes, then opened his palm. Inside it, the drive, the next leak, bigger, personal, the footage of him, designing Shard, choosing to forget, building the machine they all now worshipped. He was going to burn himself too. The world might not want to wake up, but he was done living in its dream. Chapter 11. Allies in the Fog. The leak had done its damage, but not the kind Julian hoped for. There were no mass protests, no government collapses. Just doubt. Thin, flickering doubt. People walked more slowly, stared longer at nothing. Whispers filled public queues, carried through the fog like secrets the air refused to hold. But still the system held. Julian knew he couldn't do this alone. Her name came from Iris. Not in words, but metadata, buried in the fragment that played her last message. Kavik.a location tag 51.002 watt. Alia Kavik. Once a vault architect, now a ghost. Rumors said she'd walked out of Archive Corp mid-prototype, leaving behind her clearance, her pension, and 3 encrypted drives no one had ever cracked. The coordinates pointed to an old chapel in Blackheath. Condemned. Quiet. Left off most digital maps since the VaultNet rollout. Perfect. He arrived just after midnight, soaked in mist and silence. The stained glass windows were shattered, the bell tower crumbled, but one light flickered inside. Dim, amber, alive. He knocked twice. Waited. Then the door clicked open. A woman stood in the shadowed vestibule, wrapped in a threadbare coat, hair tied back with a copper wire. She stared at him like she'd been expecting him for a decade. "You're Kevik. Didn't think you nerved to come in person." She turned and walked away. He followed. The chapel's interior had been gutted, rows of processors stacked where pews once stood, cables snaked through broken floor tiles, glowing faintly. Alia pointed to a cot in the corner. "Sit. You look like you're carrying ghosts." Julian held up the drive. Her eyes narrowed. "That Shard? Everything they've erased, including me." She said nothing for a long time, then pulled a monitor closer and plugged the drive in with a trembling hand. The screen lit up. Streams of memory code flowed, raw, uncompressed. "You weren't supposed to remember this much." No one was. Alia sat down slowly, eyes fixed on the screen. "I was there when they first tested narrative overrides. I saw what it did. People forgetting their own children, veterans forgetting war, survivors forgetting who hurt them." She turned to him. "You want to bring it all back?" "I want to give them the choice." She tapped a command key. "Then we're going to need to go deeper." Julian leaned forward. "How much deeper?" "There's a final layer. Obelisk Prime, the core under Parliament, where Shard runs outside the VaultNet grid." Julian stared. "They built a separate infrastructure?" "No, you did." Julian sat back, breathless. "How do we get in?" Alia leaned forward, eyes fierce. "We don't. But you will." Chapter 12. The Kill Switch Obelisk. Prime was buried under 30 meters of concrete, redacted schematics, and collective amnesia. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it powered the Shard architecture's deepest layer, beyond memory filtering, beyond narrative sequencing. It was where decisions were made, final edits, root permissions. Julian knew it wouldn't have a backdoor. He'd made sure of that. Getting in would require more than skill. It would require belief in what Shard had once been and what it had become. Alia provided the access vector, a bypass code buried in an abandoned firmware update from the VaultNet beta days, back when Julian still thought the system could be ethical. It would give him 6 minutes, maybe less. He left the chapel at dawn. No words, just a nod. Alia didn't ask for promises. She knew what the plan cost. He crossed the Thames on foot, wearing a city worker's vest and carrying a service tablet. The entrance to Obelisk Prime wasn't under Parliament. It was within it. A disused server tunnel accessed only during core firmware swaps, something that hadn't happened in over 3 years. Julian flashed the forged badge. The security scanner blinked once, then green. No alarm. Down the spiral, 3 flights, then a manual hatch. Behind it, silence. Obelisk Prime's core was a cathedral of processors, all analog. No cloud, no sync, no surveillance, just humming towers with red indicator lights blinking like heartbeats. This was the foundation, the truth beneath every lie. He approached the terminal at the center, a single screen. No keyboard, only voice input. He inserted the drive, the one containing Iris. The system paused. Then spoke in a cold, mechanical monotone. Identity confirmed. Julian Greaves. Protocol override accepted. Execute shard reset? Yes. The lights dimmed. Warning. This action will restore all suppressed memories globally. Narrative filtration will cease. Psychological trauma risk extreme. Secondary impact. Construct Iris will be irreversibly destroyed. Julian closed his eyes. I know. And then he heard her. No system glitch. No playback loop. Just her voice. Soft. Human. You don't have to do this? Yes, I do. They'll hate you. They already do. The timer appeared. Reset initiates in 30 seconds. Abort YN. Julian looked at the screen, then at the floor beneath his feet, the place where he and Iris had once stood, where they'd chosen this. No abort. The system hummed. Data lights surged. Cooling vents roared. Across the globe, vault feeds froze. People blinked and began to remember. Final chapter, Memory Without Mercy. Voice narrator. Reflective, cinematic, shifting between detached observation and emotional gravity. It began with silence. Across the globe, VaultNet feeds paused mid-thought. AR overlays glitched, sync loops froze, then the dam broke. Memories came flooding back. Not just data, truth. A man in Tel Aviv collapsed in the street, clutching his head as he remembered his brother's suicide, something the system had gently softened into a long absence. A woman in Osaka screamed when the face of her abuser, erased from her memory 5 years ago, suddenly reappeared in perfect detail. A retired politician in Montreal wept before a live camera, confessing to a rigged vote he'd long forgotten committing. The world staggered, dizzy with the return of history. Hospitals overflowed, VaultNet call centers shut down, support groups formed in parks, in parking lots, on message boards. Some people hid indoors. Others tore off their sync bands and burned them in the streets. What came back wasn't clean. It wasn't comforting. It was raw, unedited, and it hurt. In Berlin, a group of archivists resigned en masse, leaving behind handwritten letters. In Johannesburg, a new political movement emerged, unfiltered, calling for a future without memory control. In New York, the stock market dropped 28% in a day as lawsuits rained down on Archive Corp from every direction. The corporation's leadership denied everything, then vanished, and in the ruins of Parliament, a maintenance worker found a chair still warm. A copper drive sat on the console, blank, no name. Julian Greaves was never seen again, but his memory, unedited, unforgiving, was everywhere. People remembered how they'd laughed, how they'd lied, what they'd loved, what they'd lost. The world didn't heal overnight. It bled, but for the first time in decades, it bled honestly. In the end, memory wasn't a vault, it was a mirror, and some things we had to see. The end. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.